you would have seen the headlines in the Financial Times, article in the Financial Times by the Perm Secretary, headlines in some of the newspapers about a 25 to 30% cut in staff. So that's huge. And
UK-based staff.
That's UK-based staff. So as you can imagine, we are alarmed by that. We have the headline figure. I think it equates to approximately 1885, so 1,885 in terms of the number of staff to be cut. And the FCDO have given notice to the Insolvency Service of 1885 redundancies. So we are in consultation, but all of it is cart before the horse, because we haven't had, apart from being told that because of the spending review settlement, FCDO is getting less money and therefore we have to cut staff numbers. Apart from being told that, there is no business case to justify such a huge cut in staff numbers. There's no rationale. There's no workforce plan. We would expect all of that. I've been involved in lots of restructures in government departments where we would get all of that, and we would get an organisation redesign. So you would see what the organisation looks like now, how many directorates, how many staff, what they do and what they don't do, and then you would see the redesign of the organisation. We have had none of that. So we're very worried about the fact that we think that this is a job cuts program that's being driven by finance. It's been treated like a HR administrative restructuring program, but there's no work being done on what the FCDO currently does, what the work that it delivers, the vital stuff that it does here and overseas, actually, because obviously the two things are interlinked.
Lois,
None of that work's been done.
Could I pause you, because I'm a bit confused. So in September we got a new Foreign Secretary, and she understandably will have her priorities, her wish list where she wants to emphasise. When we had the Development Minister in front of us, we were told that they were working on the new development programme, and that we would have that sort of early, well, the draft will be early in the new year, because we were asking if we could see it before it went public, which would be sort of the end of the financial year. What I don't understand is, have they made all the ministers, have they made all their decisions on their priorities, and these staff are being cut dependent on the minister's priorities?
No, and that's a very good question, and that really goes to the essence of what the problem is. Because, for example, we had a meeting last week with the HR team that are leading on this, and we asked them specifically what in terms of the cuts to the ODA budget, what does that mean in terms of what work will no longer be done? Mm-hmm. We were told, the strategy unit is currently working on that. There's about 3 different reviews. There's an overseas network review. There's a review that the strategy unit is involved in these. There's a review of ODA and what it now means for the department in terms of development work. But that work is being done completely separate to the restructuring programme and the job cuts programme, and that for us, as I said, is alarming.
Well,
it's the cart before the horse.
It's more than alarming, it's nonsensical. And it's not the cart before a horse, because we don't know if we need a cart. We might want an EV at the end of this. So for example, if the new Foreign Secretary decides that her priority is WASH, but the whole department team has been cut and the bilateral spend has been cut, then they just say, sorry, Foreign Secretary, you can't have that. I mean, that's just an extraordinary situation.
Well, it is. And we've just had, for example, the outcome of the restructure of SCS2, so the directors.
Okay.
And what we've been told is that these new directors, So they've gone from, I think it's 42 directorates to 25 directorates. So basically, they've cut the number of directorates before all of that work about what will continue and what won't continue, all the work of the strategy unit, that work's not been completed. We've not been consulted on any of that, any of those reviews, and yet they've already begun the restructure in earnest. So they restructured the Director Generals and they restructured ExCom, so the people who sit at the top of the organisation, and they've just finished the restructure of the directors, and they've cut the number of directors and they've cut the number of directorates, all before the basic work that you would expect with a programme of this size has been done. So there's no workforce plan. There's these reviews into the work of FCDO. We don't know the outcome of these reviews, and I think actually they've barely started and we've not been consulted on them. And there's no skills audit. So they are about to launch some kind of voluntary departure scheme, and Martin knows much more about all the different schemes available to civil servants than I do, and the job protocols and all of that which we would expect them to follow, which in our view have been breached. But they're about to embark or announce a voluntary departure programme before they've done a skills audit. So what we're really, really, really worried about is vital expertise will be lost, particularly on the development side, because the bulk of the staff, for example, in Abercrombie House in East Kilbride, which is a Scotland office for FCDO, are ex-DFID staff, so they're staff with development expertise. So we want to know where the axe will fall there. So we're very worried about that.
Let me bring Brian in, if I could.
So over to you, Martin. What would be the agreed upon process for these sorts of restructures?
What we would expect based on past experience is that, first of all, there would be consultation about the new structure.
I thought that was legal. I thought you had to.
Well, yes, in terms of the business case. But in the civil service context, it probably looks there'd be a little bit more to it than just the business case about why numbers had to reduce. Not to put too fine a point on it, there would probably be some positive spin attached to it in terms of the mission of the organisation, etc., etc. But we would expect to see a detailed consultation on the actual structure that was being proposed, and out of that would come other things which would be essential, such as a strategy for getting to the new structure, which would involve, again, based on past experience, assigning people to new roles. Sometimes that would be a competitive process. Sometimes that would be a matching process. There are Cabinet Office rules about how that kind of matching is done. Staff who are not successful in going from a legacy structure to a new structure would then be in a pool where they would be under the protocols for avoiding redundancy. They would at that point have to be told that they were at risk of redundancy, but the policy of the government remains, this was confirmed to us last year, to avoid civil service redundancies, and therefore the protocols for the avoidance of redundancy 2016 is still in force as far as the Cabinet Office is concerned. So what happens to people who are displaced is, first of all, there would need to be a sequence of events, the key one of which would be what is the go-live for the new structure. Because there would be all sorts of things about maintaining continuity of roles and responsibilities, continuity of work in progress, and so on. But ultimately, people who were displaced would be in a pool, and then from our point of view as their trade union, we would be very concerned about their terms and conditions of service and also the unimpeded operation of redundancy avoidance measures.
Martin, could I just pause you there? And I'm sorry if I've missed this. So have you seen the new structure?
No.
Have the staff seen the new structure?
No, so there is no new structure, and there is no restructure document or what we would expect from a government department, and Martin and I would have dealt with this many times, some kind of managing organisational change framework document. That they don't exist, and yet Senior Civil Service 3, Senior Civil Service 2 have both been restructured.
How can they be
and we've now
restructured if we don't know what we're restructuring to?
Exactly.
So it's literally 25% of staff are being cut.
I was just going to ask, so am I right in thinking that this is the 1,885 staff number is basically a 25% overall cut, so it's just a number, an arbitrary number of staff that have been applied to that.
Yeah.
So they know what their outcome needs to be,
Yeah.
but there's no plan for it to be. They've got an overall outcome that they want to achieve, which is the 25 to 30% cuts, which equates to 1,885 people or posts or full-time posts. But you haven't seen, normally it would be the other way about. You'd have the restructure plan and then you would see which people had to leave to fit that restructure plan. But we've got an outcome without any of the planning put in place.
Sorry, cross-committee conversation.
Yeah.
But they might need 2,500 loss.
They might
need
loss.
1,000 or
Yeah.
no loss when they know what their actual model is. So I go back to your cart and horse.
So that's the problem. So you've got an outcome without any understanding of how you're trying to achieve that outcome. Normally it'd be the other way about. If there was a restructuring in the process you were saying, the process would start the other way around. We've got too many. We know we've got an overspend, or we know we've got a thing. So let's see how we rationale that. So there's none of the rationale. There's just the outcome.
There's just outcome, and the new directors, which will be taking up post shortly, then they're going to be given the job to redesign their new directorate. So again, that's really concerning, because you've got these new directors you've just put in post, and it's now going to be up to them to design their directorate, and up to them to decide what work their new directorate will
Lois,
do.
They must be doing that based on something. So we had the Shafiq review, which we were promised on multiple times this committee could see, which is the review into what the new department is looking like, what its vision is, what the needs are, and therefore what the resources are. So is it your belief that it's based on the Shafiq review? So is there something that these people are working to? It's just not in the public domain, or the staff haven't been, or do you think it's literally up to these directors to make their choices?
Well, we've been told it's up to the directors, that it's up to them to design their directorates once they're in post, and they have between now and Christmas to do it.
And now and Christmas?
But between now and Christmas to design it, and then
that's a month.
So that's a month, yeah. And then, but this is our concern. You see, this is rushed. You can't do the redundancy mitigation that Martin's talked about. You can't redesign the organisation between now and Christmas, and you can't have 1,885 people out the door by April next year, which is their intention. So all of it is one great big mess. I mean, I actually feel sorry for HR colleagues at FCDO, who are trying to get us stuff and trying to put these processes in place, but there just isn't the time. There just isn't the time to do it.
James, and then Brian.
Just want to take it up a slight level, which is when we say they, where is the driver coming from, and who is doing? Is there a consulting firm being brought in to add the speed and the pace that's necessary to achieve this work, or actually is it being left to staff to deliver, or don't you know the answer to those questions?
We think that it appears to be more led by the permanent secretary. We have not seen any reference to any form of consultancy. So really our main source is the Financial Times article by George Parker on the 25th of May of this year.
I've got some formalised questions, but I think the answers to them will be useful. So, Lois, what implementation of this restructuring have you witnessed so far?
So far, the Director Generals have been restructured, and so there's a new ExCom has been formed, or ExCo, I think it is in FCDO. So a new executive committee with the new DGs, and then there were some DGs that weren't successful in securing a role, and we believe that the protocols, the 2016 job protocols, which is an agreement between civil service unions and the government, we believe that that was breached because they were unsuccessful in securing a role. Few days later, they were given a letter, which was a letter telling them that they would be exiting the organisation in 3 months' time. Now, we said, we've got protocols which mean you can't do that. You have to do a whole process of redundancy mitigation with the Cabinet Office, period of reflection, before you issue compulsory redundancy notices. Now, the response was, we haven't issued compulsory redundancy notices. Nowhere does it say it's a compulsory redundancy notice. So we said, just because it doesn't say it's a compulsory redundancy notice, if you say to someone you are exiting the organisation in 3 months' time, which is completely outside of the protocols, with no redundancy mitigation done, in the Civil Service Compensation Scheme, which has actual legal requirements, it's a statutory document, you're supposed to give 6 months' notice if anyone's got service before November 2016 of compulsory redundancy. So in our view, none of that was done. The answer was, we're going to negotiate the terms with these people. They can leave on voluntary terms if they like. So we said, you are confusing the terms with the substance of what's happened here. You might offer voluntary terms, but it's still a compulsory redundancy notice, and you haven't done all of the mitigation that you're supposed to do. So you've breached our protocols. We hold them dearly because our members fought for those protocols, those job protections, actually went on strike to get them. So that's a big issue for us. So that's the first thing that was done. So those Director Generals are supposed to be exiting on the 1st of December. I don't think that will happen because they won't get their pension quotes in time, or the redundancy quotes, because of the crisis with my civil service pensions. Then they started on the SCS2, so the directors that are going to sit at the heads of these new directorates have just completed that process. There's less directorates now than there were before, but also we know that 7 of the directorate posts have been left vacant, so they've not filled them, which is alarming again for us because this is redundancy mitigation. Surely you fill all the posts in your new structure with the staff that you've got. We've asked the question today, and our union reps are meeting with HR later on today at FCDO to ask them, what's your intention with the 7 vacant posts? Are you going to advertise those posts externally? If not, you can't do that because that's not redundancy mitigation. Is it your intention to fill them, people applying on promotion? But how are you going to do it? So again, we think that that's outside of our job protocols. The spirits of the protocols are that you do everything you can to avoid redundancies, and you do redundancy mitigation, so you fill all the posts. Now, we know some of these directors are PCS union members, and they've spoken to us, very committed to FCDO, very committed to development work, were told that they were high achieving and actually were always high achieving, high performers in post, were told that they did a very good application interview for a role, but however they were unsuccessful. There was not a job that was a good fit for them.
But they have 7 vacancies.
Yeah.
But these very skilled people weren't competent enough to do them.
Weren't put into post.
So how many people does that put at risk?
So I think that puts, there's 20, I've been working this out this morning and we haven't been fully consulted on this yet. We'll probably get the figures at a meeting that's taking place later on today. But I think, I stand to be corrected, roughly I think it's around 29 directors who have not been appointed, so currently don't have a
29?
Post. 29, yeah. And our concern is many of them come from a development background.
Well, Lois, I mean, one of the things I was going to, so I'm not from the civil service. So these are people that would be at the level of like an ambassador if they were in country. Is it those sorts of posts?
The overseas network is not part of this.
No, but they move in and out, don't they? So I'm just trying to get the level of seniority.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's a fair point. There will be people here who have served overseas, and there will be people displaced who would potentially in the future serve again overseas, for sure.
Exactly.
Yes.
So these people are sort of at the top of the tree. They've done their service. They've been exemplary all the way through, but apparently we can't find jobs for them, and we've got 7 vacancies at their skill level. Tracy.
Grade are they?
At SCS 2. So the Director General's at SCS 3, they're SCS 2, and next they're going to deal with SCS 1s, but we think that won't be till January.
I was going to ask, what job have these people been asked to apply for? Have they been given a job description, or what? Because if they've not got a structure in place and they don't know what department or what head of department they're going to cover or what role they're going to cover, how can they say that they're able to do the role that they've been appointed to, or not able to do the job that they're appointed to? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we're presuming that they were applying for jobs as a new director in one of the new directorates. So we've got...
They must have been decided.
Yeah, so they would have been decided by EXCO.
Okay.
To go to the next formal question, which again I think is quite useful, is what is your assessment on the extent to which agreed processes have been adhered to or adhered on this occasion?
We don't think they have been adhered to.
Right.
And we've been in correspondence, and actually PCS is in dispute with the department over a breach of the protocols, breach of the civil service compensation scheme, and we know, for example, that the directors have been told again it's 3 months, and then they'll be exiting the organisation, which we think is completely outside of our protocols. Our concern is that the approach of the PUSs, there's 2, isn't there? PUSs and EXCO, is that they are, and in fact we've had this in correspondence, that they're relying on sort of legal minimums as opposed to the agreements that the unions have got in place with the Cabinet Office.
Okay, very good. Good to say.
Yeah, well, there is an issue which we've raised, which is that under the protocols, the logical endpoint for people who are surplus is a compulsory redundancy, but the whole point of the exercise is to avoid that. And so currently, the Cabinet Office holds a sign-off, and the PUS does not have the authority to make people compulsory redundant without going to the Cabinet Office, and there would be a stage which would take place at the Cabinet Office, which would involve the trade unions of the individuals concerned, and that's called a redundancy mitigation review, and that's all set out in those protocols as well.
Next question is, what conversations have you had with the department regarding the concerns that you have?
Okay, so we're in dispute. It's a dispute using the procedures that we've got, the engagement framework that we've got with the FCDO, between the unions and FCDO. So we are in dispute. We've just finished stage 1. We've got a meeting this afternoon, but we're about to write to them and say none of our concerns have been sorted out, and therefore we want to move to stage 2 of the dispute process. We're not yet in a statutory dispute. What we want to happen is we want the department to stop. We want them to pause. We want them to wait for the outcomes of these reviews. We want them to consult with us on the rationale for all of this. We want to see a workforce plan, starting from the top, going right down to the bottom. Because once you get to the delegated grades, which is primarily PCS members, you're talking about people in Abercrombie House, in East Kilbride, where there's very few employment prospects if you're not working for the FCDO. You're talking about lower grade staff finding it very difficult to get redeployment where the rest of civil service and public sector is contracting. So we're really worried that those in the delegated grades are going to be treated the same way as those in civil service grades, and so we're in dispute, we're pushing back, we want them to stop, we want them to pause, we want them to do this properly, we want a rationale, we want the result of these consultations, and we want a document that tells us how they're going to do it, so that we know that there is a fair and consistent process, which we don't believe there is at the moment.
Can I bring in Janet and then Tracy?
So, Lois, in terms of the reviews, have you been given an end date when they're likely to conclude? Have you been given any information on that?
No, I mean, we only found out that there was a review into the consequences of the odour cut and the impact that would have, and what work could be done and what work could no longer be done. We only found that out last week, so we were like, oh right, well, can we be consulted about that, please? Can we have a meeting with the strategy unit who are carrying out this review? This is really important. Why are you restructuring before we know the outcome of the review into what the odour cuts mean for the department? Surely that's ABC. So no, we haven't.
And who do you have that conversation with?
So we have that conversation with HR.
Right.
I mean, we have complained and said that we really need to be meeting people higher up the food chain and the people making the decisions. We have had one meeting, I think, in the last year with the PUS Ollie Robbins, but we have been requesting that we meet people higher up the food chain so that we can meet the people who are making decisions and convey to them firsthand the concerns of our members.
Very quick question. Do you have any idea of the value of the work? If you're talking 2,000 jobs, give or take, do you know roughly how much of the FCDO's budget that will equate to?
No.
Level doesn't it?
I know it would depend on value.
but
Yeah, you haven't calculated
not in
that.
terms of monetary value. I mean, they're saying it's they're saying it's in order to meet spending review, settlement. That we said, well, there's other ways to cut costs. So why don't we have consultation on all of that, on the whole piece, and ways to cut costs without cutting staff and losing vital expertise? And then the response to that is, well, you can't save the amount of money that we need to save using other methods. It really needs to be a big staff cut. I mean, we are opposed to the job cuts, full stop. Also, it's not just that none of it's been done right. We want to fight to maintain these jobs for our members. They're good jobs, they're good quality jobs. FCDO, just across the road in Whitehall, is a very diverse department. They're important jobs, and our members are committed to FCDO, particularly those that work on the development side, and the same for Abercrombie House. So we really, I mean, what PCS is saying, that the funding needs to be restored. We don't accept the spending review settlement. It should never have happened. We don't accept the cut to ODA. And, you know, there's been really good stuff written, and I know you're going to hear testimony in a minute about the vital programmes that are being carried out in the developing world, feeding people, you know, aid, vaccination programmes. That will just stop. Our members and reps have been emailing me this morning because they knew we were coming to this committee, talking about some of the work that's done in countries, and talking about the impact that the cut to ODA will have on Britain's soft power, for example, the link with that. And also they've asked me to raise with this committee and asked you to investigate the cuts that are currently taking place to country-based staff in UK embassies. I think 8 to 10 staff have been cut just in the last week in African countries. So that needs to be investigated.
I want to come on to that, but one other thing that you've not mentioned is this comes after 5 years of cuts.
Yes.
And the uncertainty and pressure that these staff have been under is extraordinary, and we absolutely owe them a debt of gratitude, because they are very much our front line. You know, when my constituents are getting cut overseas, or when the poorest people in the world are being ethnically cleansed,
yes.
it's our department in FCDO people that are actually out there fighting and making the difference. And my understanding is there's already still 200 vacancies in the development side. So it seems curious to me that on one hand they're trying to recruit, and on the other hand there's this chilling spectre hanging over everybody right now. It must be an awful situation, and as you rightly say, these are very, very dedicated, committed people. So I feel for them. Tracy, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just a point of clarification. When you were talking about that internal escalation in the internal dispute system, where does that end up? Whose door does that eventually end up at?
I would imagine it's the PUS. That's where we'll be heading, and the General Secretary of PCS. That's where, at the moment, I've been dealing with it, Martin's been dealing with it, but it
from an internal point of view, from FCDO, whose desk is it? Is it just like higher up in the HR, or does it end up?
No, I'd have to have another look at it, but I'm presuming that at some point it will be at the PUS's door. But we are also considering a trade dispute over the job cuts and over the breach of our agreements.
My other question was: is there something in your agreement about freezing on other recruitment?
We would expect to see that as an early redundancy mitigation measure.
And has that happened?
Because they're not consulting on redundancy mitigation measures currently, we haven't yet seen that. So as far as we know...
Well, we have been complaining for several weeks that there's still recruitment taking place. For example, our reps were being asked to come and do inductions for new staff as to why they should join trade unions. And they were saying, why are we doing inductions when there's a job cut programme? So they have... And what I think was happening was that the centre didn't have control over what was happening across the whole organisation, so directors were sort of paddling their own canoes in terms of external recruitment. So something has now gone out to say that all of that has got to stop. So it has gone out now.
So are you aware of any ministerial oversight of this?
No, none at all.
That to me is the biggest worry, because it should be the ministers that are setting the direction, and absolutely the PUSs, they do the logistics, the administration, the HR to make that happen. But what worries me is that gap seems to be quite enormous right now.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to remind our union reps that the PUS is not elected.
Exactly.
He's an official. He's there to do what the government asks him to do. He's not a law unto himself. And I think that's what's behind breaching our agreements. That he thinks he's a law unto himself and that he can ignore our agreements. And it's just a matter of law when it comes to redundancy law. We don't accept that. I think we did write to David Lammy when all of this was first announced, and we got no response from him, which is unfortunate. So, I mean, we don't know of any ministerial oversight, but hopefully this committee can try and get some ministerial oversight.
Is it possible to get a copy of that letter?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. David Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on what we were just discussing about the cuts overseas. So it'd be great if you could just elaborate a bit more detail and what the implications of these you think will be.
Okay, so these are cuts to non-UK based staff. Now we have some of our reps and members overseas were sending stuff through saying, Lois, do you know they've cut 8 staff here, 10 staff here? I haven't got the detail of that now because there's a nervousness from some of our reps to be, telling us what's going on, because they'll all be applying for their own jobs at some point. But what they wanted to make sure that this committee knows about is that these cuts are happening in country-based staff, which and what union members have told us who are working overseas is that their directors of overseas have said, we want to get ahead of the curve. We know big cuts are coming and we want to get ahead of the curve. Now that, again, is really worrying because we haven't had the outcome of the overseas review yet. And yet country-based
any
staff.
review,
No,
so.
but country-based staff are being cut.
I've had a number of overseas people contact me to say that they're all going through a process of review right now. And I think that's also part of the chilling effect that, as you say, people are trying to get ahead of it, whether or not it comes. But the outcome is likely to be that people lose their jobs as a consequence.
Yeah.
Sorry, David.
No, I mean, not at all. So could you just reiterate again the stats that you mentioned earlier, like the numbers that we're talking about?
So we were getting reports a few weeks ago of 8 staff here, 10 staff there, in different embassies in different countries, mainly African countries. One of our union reps said to me this morning that in the last week, 8 staff have been cut from embassies in African countries. Now, what we can do is go away and try and get you a fuller report on that.
That would be very helpful.
But what you have to bear in mind is that there is a nervousness from our reps and members on the ground to give us stuff, basically.
You know, is it UK staff or local staff that are being cut?
It's local.
Ah.
Yeah. So it's staff employed locally in embassies that are being cut.
Eventually that won't be making a big difference anyway.
No.
The UK staff overseas will be dealt with in exactly the same way as UK staff here, presumably.
Yes.
The UK based, they're paying tax in the UK.
Yes, they're not in scope of the restructuring.
They're not part.
There is a separate overseas network review, which has not yet reported.
They're not part of the 1885, the overseas staff.
Thank you. Janet.
Yeah, thank you. Lois, you've already mentioned Abercrombie House and implications for staff to do with the restructuring. I'm just wondering if you just wanted to add any more, yourself and Martin, just to do, anything you're aware of the implications for staff there. And I know you've mentioned DFID staff there having the most experience and staff from all different grades really being quite worried. But anything else that you want to tell us on that?
Mine might say about places for growth.
Yeah, we did. I mean, obviously, probably won't be surprised to know that we talked to our Scottish-based colleagues about the impact, and obviously what we were fishing for was whether there might be redeployment opportunities. The HMRC are also in East Kilbride. Obviously, Scottish government sector would be an area of interest. But there are cuts all over the place. So as well as the great loss of expertise, we are worried actually about the scale of external redeployment options. But it's an area of concern.
And also it contradicts the government's places for growth strategy, which is about moving jobs out of London, although, as trade unionists, we don't support robbing Peter to pay Paul. I've got children that need jobs in London, but there is supposed to be this strategy to move jobs out of London, whereas we have been told that it has been confirmed by FCDO that they are going to maintain a presence in that part.
Well, a presence could be 2 people.
Yeah, exactly. We need to know what a presence means. That's what we need to know. What does that mean?
David?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I was very disappointed because there was a proposal for the development of a UK government campus in Greater Glasgow, a new building. And when the committee was in Glasgow, the feedback to us was that Abercrombie House requires significant upgrading for all particularly higher levels of work to be done there, and that's obviously a budgetary demand as well on a decreasing budget. And therefore the concern is that the lack of facilities at Abercrombie House is just used as another reason as to why less people are required there. That's my
That's my concern.
Yeah.
It's a very important facility, very important for Scotland to retain that expertise.
Absolutely, and those jobs in that part of west of Scotland. I mean, we our members in Abercrombie House are sort of, it's a mix of views. Some want to go to Scotland, some live local to Abercrombie House, so that want to go to Glasgow. Some live local to Abercrombie House and don't want to go to Glasgow. But what we've said is we just need to make sure that there is a presence, that these jobs are kept, and that there is a presence in this part of the west of Scotland. That's the most important thing.
Can I very quickly just clarify what's the cadence of any updates that you're getting? What are there weekly meetings that you're able to update? Like how structured is the approach? Because it sounds just like absolute chaos.
Well, so we meet with HR twice a week, and as I said, I mean, they are really doing their best, you know, and they're under enormous pressure to try to do all of this in the timescales, and it's not possible. And we keep saying to them, it's not possible. The task that you've been given is an impossible task. But we haven't had so we meet and we discuss, but what we haven't had is the really important stuff that we need. So we haven't had a restructure document. We haven't had an equality impact assessment.
Are they telling you that that's coming?
For example. So we've been told that that's coming.
And for how long have you been told that that's coming?
Couple of months, you know, really since the, I mean, so the announcement in the Financial Times in May, then there were staff meetings throughout the summer. So really since then we've been saying, right, okay, how are you going to do this? Where's the business case? Where's the rationale? Where's the analysis of all of the work that's currently done? Where's the organisation redesign? And where's your managing organisational change framework document? And we've been told that, the rationale is the spending review settlement. That's the rationale. And we've been told that the restructure document is coming. We were given one document which we just didn't think was fit for purpose. So we said, you cannot restructure an organisation in that way. You need to, take that away. We've sent several correspondence, several letters about the restructuring document, what it should consist of, how it should be done. We haven't yet had a full response to those letters. But the point is the restructure is underway. 2 grades, SCS3, SCS2 have been restructured. Directorates are being redesigned between now and Christmas. And then they start on the rest of the organisation, and we have none of that stuff.
The reason that we're having this session today is we raised it with the Minister, who appeared unaware of the detail of this and asked for this session. I'm just wondering, listening to the two of you, if we weren't getting you here to put this under a spotlight, do you think the plan was just to roll it all through under the carpet and then oops, January?
Absolutely. Sorry, Mum, but I think we have slowed them down a bit. I think they have had to say we're not going to breach the protocols, but I don't think they agree with us on what the protocols mean and consist of. I think they said we're not going to breach the protocols, or we haven't breached the protocols, but they have, in our view. We think they don't agree with us on what the protocols mean. And I think that they were just going to do it from summer, from sort of May or August. They did the restructure the DGs over the summer, and then do all of that work, and they wanted it all finished by April and just apply the legal minimums in terms of 25% of staff this grade, 25% of staff at that grade, out the door, 3 months notice.
Is this happening in all departments or just FCDO?
I think this is quite specific to FCDO. There are other departments where there are large cuts, and there are other departments where we are likely to be in dispute over compliance with the exact contents of the protocols. But the FCDO does seem to be an outlier in terms of twice-a-week meetings, of which there isn't really a great deal to say. It would make again the point about the difficulties with the civil service pension administration. So, because I think they walked into that without having seen that coming. If you're going to rely on people deciding to leave voluntarily in order to get your numbers, then it's only reasonable to expect that people will need to know exactly what those offers are. And that would be the pension administrator that would do that. We know that the pension administrator is not going to be in a position to do that before the end of the year. So that would appear to be something that's going to have to work its way out in the early part of 2026. But obviously, I'm sure people here will be concerned about if that approach were to be successful, what knowledge and expertise would be lost if people were forced into a choice that isn't really a choice.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is one of my big concerns, that if people take the voluntary redundancy, what happens if a whole department goes? By the nature of it, I would imagine it's going to be the more experienced people who can either get another job or who are reaching retirement age, and that breadth of knowledge. You know, we were very damning about the DOJ in the US getting rid of databases of information, but our people are our databases of information, and if we lose those, I don't know what resilience the department's got.
Yeah, well, I mean, we need to look closely, and we haven't had a chance yet because the restructure of the directors has only just happened, and union reps will today ask about the detail of that and exactly who hasn't got a job and or a role in the new structure, and what expertise they have, and they'll also be asking a question: what's the balance between the development side and the diplomatic side? Because we're really concerned that that's where we're going to lose. We're going to lose the skills and the expertise. And as Martin said, I mean, because the job cut is so huge and there's so much uncertainty and people are so worried, what we're also worried about is people are going to opt to go.
Absolutely.
On a voluntary
This
scheme.
has been going for 5 years.
Yeah.
Can I bring Sam in, please?
Sorry, just before that, have you seen any evidence of that already? Because obviously the cuts were announced in February. We were actually on the way to Abercrombie House as they were announced. Yes. Have you seen evidence of the workforce starting to leave? Is that part of the strategy?
Well, possibly it is. There was a voluntary exit scheme early in the year, and I think around 500 exited the organisation through that. They haven't launched a new scheme yet. They're just about to launch expressions of interest.
Have you seen a skills audit of those that left?
No, we haven't, but we can ask for that. We can ask for that.
Very interesting.
Yeah. But they're about to launch an expressions of interest for a new voluntary exit scheme. So, you know, again, we'll have to look at that and monitor it and see who's leaving. I mean, they've made the point that we reserve the right to say no, certain people can't go if we want their expertise.
But if you don't know what expertise you want, how are you going to do that?
Yeah, well, and you haven't done a skills audit.
Exactly.
So how do you,
And that 500...
But people aren't going to say, oh, I speak Mandarin and Russian. Please give me a redundancy payment, are they?
And 500 isn't part of the 1885. That 1885 is on top of the 500.
That's on top of that. Yeah. We've asked that question. Yeah, that's on top. 1885 is on top of the 500 that have already gone. Yeah.
Yes. So it's not a good time to work in international development, is it? On either side of the pond. And you've already alluded to the fact that it's not going to be easy for a lot of these people to be re-employed because they genuinely are experts in their field. Do you have a sense from the staff that you're working with how this will impact on the development mission of the FCDO?
That's a really good question, and we're trying to get to the bottom of that, and we're going to ask that now we've got the outcome of the director restructure, we will be asking those questions. We do know, for example, that there's a review. I said that earlier, that there's a review, which we didn't know about until last week. We sort of found out by accident. So we've asked to be consulted about that, and to get the people who are carrying out that review to come and talk to us, and that has been agreed to. So we should get more information. But in terms of the new directorates, we know that the two that deal with development, this is 2 directorates in the new structure. So the Humanitarian Directorate and the Human Development Directorate, they have not had a director appointed to those.
I know.
Will they?
So, well, again, that's the question. We only got this, literally, we've only just found this out in the last few days. So we're going to ask the question about there's 7 that haven't, there's 7 new director roles that have had nobody appointed to them. What is very concerning in terms of the development side, as I said, is these 2 main ones for development have had nobody appointed. So we need to find out, ask why not, and out of those 29 directors that haven't been appointed, was there nobody amongst those 29 that came from a development background, which would have had the expertise to fill those roles? So we need to get to the bottom of that.
My other concern is that humanitarian is very different from development. And I know that the government is planning to, focus on humanitarian and multilateral. So it does raise the concern of what's actually going to happen with what we would traditionally see as development.
It'd be good to see that structure, actually, if we could see what you have in terms of where the vacancies currently exist and what they've managed to fill and what's still available, so that we can at least get a sense of what whoever's making this vision.
I think that's the missing thing for us, is understand the business case. Like, is this simply being driven by a need to get headcount down? So essentially, the bottom line is we need to save money. Come what may, we need to get rid of staff in the most painless way possible. Or has there been some analysis, at least, of where they may think that there is wastage or inefficiency in the system where you can make some sort of saving while still basically delivering the same outputs?
It's entirely consistent with Minister Malhotra's response to the ODA Westminster Hall debate, when she didn't set out any clear strategic objectives. So I think in my view, it's obviously the former.
But have they said? Is there anything that's been said around the strategy to this, where they see there being waste or efficiency savings that are possible?
I think the problem is they don't share that information with us.
Right.
And to an extent, that would be for understandable reasons.
They've either got it, but they haven't shared it, or they don't know it and we don't have it.
So we can't really give you.
Ask the minister.
You probably need to know the terms of reference of the review as well.
Yeah.
What does that entail? What's it about? What's it? The detail really, and have a look and question that.
I mean, Sam, you said, can we ask the minister? But if you remember, on the 28th of October, in our Sudan session, the development minister said she would come before us, and she wanted, with her PUS, to interrogate all of this. And no, now she's unavailable.
Do you think this is the development minister, though, or do you think this is the foreign? It's not the foreign secretary overall, because these staff are ultimately all part of the FCDO.
I mean, the development minister asked us to have this session that we're having today, and asked to be in front of us with her PUS. So, and she's a strong woman. I think she knows her own mind.
Presumably there is an internal document that they could share with us that says this is the logic of what we're doing and this is how we feel we can still deliver.
One would hope so.
There's a legal requirement, if they have announced that there's a compulsory redundancy potentially of 1,885 staff, for them to share that information with you, to give you that rationale for the business case for the trade unions to agree it. Or then you're in legal territory, unlawful, which will be your fundamental dispute ultimately, I guess. So when you're asking HR for that evidence in terms of reference, business case, what are they coming to you with? They're just saying the cuts have to be made. That's as much as you're getting.
We were discussing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any pretense on their part that they're discussing their structure design with us. I mean, there are government departments that would take a different approach and would want us to think that we were being consulted about new structure. But there's been nothing like that. So what I would want to say though is that doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist. What it does mean is it hasn't been shared with us in any form. We pick up bits and pieces of information which comes from members. Some of those members are in quite senior job roles. So, for example, we know that there must be some work behind the restructure because we've seen job specs for director roles. So, obviously, it's not...
Someone's written them.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So, whether we would expect that level of consultation or not, it hasn't taken place. What we tend to get is this is how we're going to approach this particular stage, and when you look at that stuff and you've got people from the branch with you, the impression I have is that when the hard questions are asked, they say, oh, well, this is early thinking. We'll come back to you next week with another draft.
And I get and understand that, but this is people's lives. It's our international standing, and this is the most poor and vulnerable people in the world dependent on these outcomes. And what it feels like is not that they're doing it on the hoof, but it feels very numbers driven. I think there is a cascade going on, so we'll get the top people in and then let them sort out their bids. I'm assuming there's a hope that they're not going to need to come up with this restructure document because they will have shed enough just by the chilling effect of this. And I'm concerned about ministerial oversight. I'm concerned about the resilience of the department going forwards. And I'm really concerned about those poor staff that are trying to do their jobs in the most difficult circumstances anyway, without this being layered on top. Members, any more, Janet?
Yeah, just you'd mentioned that there were some overseas cuts, particularly in the African countries, and it was to do with the local staff that are on the ground. I suppose I'm just interested in more information around why local staff would have been viewed as essential for some of that overseas work, and then the implications of the outcomes of those staff no longer being in place. I don't know if you've got any information on that, or if you hold any of those concerns as well.
No, I mean, our reps and members on the ground in those countries are really concerned, and their messages are coming to me, that they're cutting country-based staff, they're employed in embassies. You need to make sure that the committee knows about that, but I can go away and get more information for you on that.
But it'll be interesting to know if there's been a directive to look at your staffing structure cuts, or if this is something that people are doing as an assumption they need to.
Our reps have said that they think that there is, as I said, directors are saying they want to get ahead of the curve. That's how they've explained it to me. If that's true, that's really worrying, because it means local staff are being shed before we've had the overseas review. By the way, there is a terms of reference for that, which we just had for the overseas review. We haven't had terms of reference for any of the other reviews, so we can share that.
That would be helpful.
Yeah.
And one final question from me. I'm assuming that there are other unions working with this, and you're working with them, and everyone's getting the same message or lack of message here.
Yes, and in actual fact, the first shot across the bows on the protocols for the avoidance of redundancy was fired by the FDA when the Director Generals were told that if they weren't successful in getting a post, they'd be out the door before the end of the year. So yes, this is the main unions in FCDO are PCS and the FDA. Obviously, there are other unions.
Prospect.
Prospect as well. But Yes, so there is a combined trade union side, and it does meet, and it has formally registered the dispute, hasn't it?
The trade union side hasn't. At the moment, it's PCS that have registered a dispute. We wanted the other unions to join us in that. They said they weren't quite ready just yet to join us in dispute.
Okay.
But yeah, as Martin said, the Director Generals, who effectively were given a compulsory redundancy notice, but we're told that it wasn't a compulsory redundancy notice. They are FDA members, so they sort of led the charge on that issue.
So presumably, when they got the redundancy notice that wasn't a redundancy notice, they would have got some sort of settlement alongside that, and that's public money.
Oh yes, we don't know any details. I mean, yes, I mean, we're talking about a small group of people, so they'll be individually identifiable. So we have to be.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify, relative to the last time you went through something, obviously not on this scale, but something similar within the FCDO, what's the sense of change? Were you speaking to different levels of people in those previous instances compared to now? What would be the 3 or 4 identifiable differences so we can say, this is how this experience is distinctive from other FCDO experiences?
I suppose at FCDO I haven't, because I've been the full-time official there for about a year, so I haven't. But there was the merger with DFID, FCO and DFID merged, didn't they? So, and I know that's been working its way through now for several years in terms of aligning terms and conditions and stuff like that. I have done restructures, I don't think any as big as this, where you're talking about cutting 25 or 30% of staff, but I have done big restructures before. And, we did have arguments about how it was to be done with, I think, the Ministry of Justice or DEFRA. We had arguments, but nothing like this. We had a business case. We had a huge, big restructure document about how you were going to move through the grades, matching people into roles, or mapping people into roles with a certain amount of training and support, or a trial period in that role.
And really you're seeing none of that?
With none of that. I can remember sitting in the Cabinet Office, dealing with redundancies at the Ministry of Justice, sitting in one of the tiny little rooms, going through lists of names about how we were going to redeploy individuals, how we were going to redeploy disabled members of staff that needed reasonable adjustments put in place if they were to take up a post somewhere else. And none of that work, I can't see how that work is going to be done in these timescales.
But if I can push you on that, that might happen, but it's not possible in the timescales that are being set out.
Yeah.
So we need to have hope that the department does the right thing.
Absolutely, but what is worrying is that, for example, the redundancy mitigation for the directors, they've already received an at-risk notice and told that they will be exiting. The ones not successful have been put at risk and could potentially, if they don't find a new role, be exiting the organisation in 3 months' time. So redundancy mitigation is being done when those who haven't secured a new role have already got a date when they're going to leave. You've just got 3 months of redundancy mitigation. That's not in the spirit of the 2016 job protocols.
Consultation had to be part of this process.
Yes, it does. So that's one of the main reasons why we view it as being completely non-compliant.
Right, let us end on that point. I would be really grateful if you could keep us updated as much as you can. We will be pushing on this because the FCDO staff are our most valuable asset in delivering good value for money when it comes to odour, and they're literally our front line for our reputation. So thank you both very much. You're most welcome to stay, but can I bring the new panel forward, please?
Thank you.
Thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
Apologies that we're running a little late, but hopefully it's self-evident why. If you can read it.
Down there, so
Make the most of it.
While you're still settling yourselves, can I welcome you? Thank you very much. And can I ask you to quickly zip down the line and introduce yourselves and the organisation you're here representing? Freddie, could I start with you?
Thanks very much. My name is Freddie Carver and I am the Director of the Humanitarian Policy Group at ODI Global.
Thank you.
I'm Anna Schüstel. I'm the Director of Communications for ODI Global.
Good afternoon. I'm Gideon Rabinowitz. I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy for Bond, which is the representative body for international development charities in the UK.
Hi, I'm Emma Maudsley. I'm an academic at Cambridge University.
Thank you all very much for coming. Obviously, you were in the room hearing about all of the staff changes that are going forward at pace. We thought that we were having you here just to talk about the future of aid, the inquiry that we've got that's ongoing, and thank you for your submissions to that. But I think we need to focus on the reality on the ground right now. So could I pass to Tracy for the first questions?
Thank you, Chair. Hi, I'll start with Gideon if that's okay. Yeah, just on that vein, what are the risks of the UK's ability to deliver effective humanitarian and development work with a 20% reduction to staff?
Yeah, so if I may, I'll make quite a few points very, very quickly, and then happy to come back to anything that you want to dig into. So firstly, we all there's a consensus. It's been very clear that the merger of DFID and the FCDO led to a very significant loss in development capability, and maybe that's been paused. Maybe I do remember the Permanent Secretary saying some new posts had been added on the development side, but we haven't got back to where we were certainly before the merger, and now there's a real risk that this leads to a very serious further decline in development capability. Now, obviously, you need a strategy to guide where you still need that capability. So the questions you've been asking in the previous session are absolutely the right ones. If you don't have a strategy to define that, to guide that, how do you know you're going to have the right capacity and capability to address the challenges you want to continue engaging on? And then, as has already been noted, their directorates are being merged. At the Director General level, we used to have a Director for Humanitarian and Development, and there was a separate one for Economic, Climate and Global Issues. Those are now being merged into one called Global Issues. What that means is we are yet to be informed. So at each level, you have fewer senior level people able to be engaged across the department in sharing their expertise and their oversight in working around these development issues, and that's a real challenge. We're spending more money now proportionately through multilaterals. I think there is this somewhat false sense that means you need less staff. You need staff to be able to engage those multilaterals, make sure that they are focused on the right things, they're following through on their reform plans, you've got the right understanding of what they do to engage them effectively, and that's a serious challenge. There are a number of policy areas where the government have said we'll have less money, but we want to still be engaged on policy and use our diplomatic might. For example, gender. We're obviously very concerned about the levels of reduction in spending on gender, but the government says we'll still be in spaces globally to influence policy and international action on gender. How are you going to do that with less capacity?
On that, yes. I keep on hearing that all the gender advisors are being got rid of. Have you heard that?
So we are hearing that those roles are under threat, yes, but I haven't got specifics, but I can find that out for you and share that with the committee. And then, the Development Minister has been very clear that the department's going to move towards 4 major shifts in the way it delivers. I won't go through those. You've heard from the Minister about them. Well, how are those shifts defined? How are they conceptualised? How are you going to support country offices deliver them consistently and effectively to deal with all the risks that are involved in stopping service delivery, for example, and moving to building capacity? How can you do that effectively without the right capacity centrally? And then there are complex policy challenges in which you need the right capacity, the right expertise to be able to deliver effectively. So one example is conflict and security. What we're hearing is they're merging units working on conflict and stabilisation, human rights and humanitarian into joint units. Well, how do you know you're not, what's guiding that? How do you know you're not losing expertise that will be fundamental to delivering effectively in each of those areas? And then one final macro point. We're told that the aid reduction is a temporary one, that when fiscal conditions improve, then aid will start increasing again. If this is a change 2030 process and we get to 2030 with a department that's significantly smaller, how is it going to deliver an uplift in aid that we hope will come when the economic prospects look better? So there is a bit of a question, is there an assumption already that, this is the world we're going to stay in for some time? And that raises questions about the government's ambitions and intentions around aid levels in general.
You've touched on there about some of the risks in this strategy. Could you sort of give some specifics where you think that the risk to the accountability of UK ODA under those circumstances, and how could we mitigate some of that if they were to go ahead?
So, I think there are a number of questions this committee and others have asked in recent years since the merger of DFID and the FCO about how effectively the oversight mechanisms that were in place, for example, in DFID, have been sustained, maintained, in order to safeguard spending, ensure we're securing value for money, and to report on development impacts. And I think there's a serious risk that without adequate capacity to ensure that those processes, those systems are in place, we're going to struggle to focus on oversight and reporting on development impact, for example. So we've, one of the indicators of this for us is that since the merger, there has been far less information generated by the FCDO on what impact it's had across its programs. So we used to see in DFID annual reports a detailed results reporting section where we could look across all the human development areas, conflict security, engagement on rights, gender, etc., what the impacts of programs were. We've seen far less of that since the merger, and that tells us that on some level those systems aren't quite what they were, and the prospects of putting those back into place, putting them at a level that is required to do that oversight and reporting on value for money and impact are much weaker with less capacity in the centre.
And just finally from me, what are the potential impacts to the lives of the extremely poor should these cuts materialise?
So, firstly, the overall aid cuts obviously risk major implications. So we, for example, we did welcome the level of funding given to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and to the Global Fund for AIDS, TB and Malaria. The funding that has been is being provided will save lots of lives and prevent millions of infections. But we have to recognise it's in the case of Gavi, it's 24% less than the previous pledge, and in the case of the Global Fund, it's 15% less than the original pledge. The analysis by organisations members of Bond suggests this will lead to over 500,000 additional deaths from those diseases as a result of that funding not being in the system set up by Gavi and the Global Fund. So that is just one area and one indication of the number of lives at stake. One of our members, Save the Children, for example, estimated that 55 million people will be affected by the reduction in services and support as a result of the aid cuts that are already being implemented.
Thank you very much.
Just UK aid cuts or international?
Yes, UK aid cuts, yeah.
Wow. Brian.
Thank you, and I'll start with you, Freddie, but probably the rest of you will want to have your say on this as well. We hear that 2/3 of the world's extreme poor are likely to be living in fragile and conflict-affected states by 2030. Are the spending and policy priorities for ODA fit for purpose, given that is where the bulk of the world's poor are situated?
Thanks very much, and I think you've put your finger on an absolutely critical point in this whole discussion, and I think we are extremely concerned at ODI about the capacity of the FCDO to be able to shape this agenda going forwards, which really is going to be at the core of the future humanitarian agenda, development agenda, security agenda, and this is a really major concern, because these are often environments where the global system has struggled to identify appropriate long-term solutions, where humanitarian programming has acted as a sticking plaster. We think about contexts that I'm sure you're familiar with, like South Sudan, Somalia, DRC, countries that have had humanitarian operations running into the hundreds of millions in place for many, many years. Those are not there because those are high-profile, immediate crises that are taking place, but because, frankly, we don't have any better options, and we have extreme poor in extreme situations of precarity for which we have few other alternatives. And to some extent, with the cuts that are taking place, countries like Sudan, Gaza, the priorities that are hitting the headlines every day, there is going to be a degree of mitigation, a degree of protection. I don't want to underestimate the impact in places like that as well. But these kind of chronic fragile settings are really going to be in serious trouble. And we don't see across the international system the thinking required about what the alternatives are. At the same time as the humanitarian system is looking to step back from these places and prioritise their resources on the most pressing crises, we also have signals from the multilateral development banks, from the World Bank in particular, that they need to focus on what they consider their core business. So this is a huge policy issue, not just for the UK, but for others. We have a very large population that are vulnerable, and I think the key dimensions of these environments are their complexity. You need to be able to navigate very complex governance environments. You need to be able to work with state and non-state actors. Every fragile setting is different. Every fragile setting operates in a very complex geopolitical environment. I know you've done a lot of work on Sudan, and Sudan, I think, is a classic example where you need to be thinking about geopolitics, development, humanitarian assistance, atrocity prevention, regional dynamics. All of this needs to come together. And I think what we see and what we hear about the changes that are happening within the FCDO and that you've been looking into over the last hour, and what we're ending up with is siloing, is a kind of return in a way back to people being kind of kept in little boxes. A lot of association still, despite how long it's been since the merger, of expertise with development spending. And so the question's about how are you going to bring together that integrated capacity to deliver the kind of political and aid effect that we need to make a difference in these dynamics. Is very unclear how that is going to take place. And I think the last point I'll make is it goes back to the point you've been pressing on, which is where's the strategy? Fine, the FCDO needs to make choices. It's in a very, we can debate around the cuts that are being made. But if you're going to make those cuts, if you're going to have this kind of staffing decision, then you better go into it with a very clear plan about what your priorities are, what your values are, and I want to emphasise that as well. I think another issue that the FCDO needs to think about is if we're going to have a viable humanitarian system going forwards, we need a broader conversation about the norms that underpin that. The traditional donors no longer have a monopoly on those norms. In fact, in some cases, they're the ones threatening those norms. So the FCDO needs to drive a really important multilateral policy conversation, but it also needs capacity on the ground to focus on that. Where's the choices? Where is the prioritisation that's going to enable that?
Yep. Are there other... Do any of the rest of you want to comment on this? Yeah.
Briefly, please.
Yeah, maybe just on the angle around the donor to investor shift as well. So I think what's underestimated are the systems. So obviously, ideally, we want to work towards systems that work in the countries that need assistance. But in order to get some of these systems running, it depends on the country and where they're at with their regulatory and financial environment, right? And so there's a question around strategy, which countries are being targeted, because the return will be delayed depending on what country it is. That then creates a challenge for communication as well with the taxpayers, like where are the changes, why don't we see them yet? And if the staffing is being cut, especially in countries, these relationships can't be built because system change requires trust, it requires expertise over time. So it needs staff retention and it needs people being there. So at this point, I think it's quite difficult to see how the donor to investorship and the systemic change shift happens if it's not staffed.
The next question is fairly specific, and let's see who can answer it. It's what would be the possible impact if teams such as the atrocity prevention team were to experience a reduction in staff? And if I can add to that, I've heard that they have not been involved in Sudan. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It'd be interesting to hear. And I've also heard that it's likely the whole of that department is to be axed.
I can maybe come back on that. I mean, I think I can't speak to the specifics of the nature of the conversation, all the conversations that have happened around Sudan policy. But I think that is a very real concern, and I've also spoken to people who are anxious. It goes back to this point around integration. And actually, I've heard that the human rights capacity, to the extent that it's being retained, and in the latest organograms I've seen, if you look at them, you don't actually see conflict, let alone seeing human rights, let alone seeing atrocity prevention. So it's unclear where these things are going to sit. It's very unclear that those capacities are going to come together either. And I think what you need, there's two things, I think. One is about having those capacities well enough resourced and able to be surged when needed. The second thing is about having the leadership that ensures that capacity and expertise is going to be listened to. And I think I would have concerns on both fronts.
Sam, did you want to come in?
Could I just pick up on something? So you just mentioned that you've seen organograms. We haven't. How were you able to acquire those? And would you share them with us? Because you've probably heard the previous session, and we're confused as to what the strategy is.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say I've seen a strategy, but I have a feeling what I've seen is the same image that the previous speakers have seen. So, yes, I'm happy to share.
The organogram that you've seen gets rid of atrocity prevention.
It's at a different level. So this is very much a top line, what I've seen. But so, yes. But I think the point is, talking to people, there's a lot of uncertainty about where some of these pieces will come together. And as I say, going back to what I said before, there is a real concern about a degree of siloing that's going on.
I mean, I would be surprised if that is the case, just because I know how keen the government is to solve the asylum crisis, and I'm sure that they would want to look at push factors as well as pull factors within the strategy.
I mean, there's a consensus internationally that a growing proportion of extreme poverty and global challenges are in fragile states. So, if this department, whatever strategy it's coming up with, either behind the scenes or in the future, that will be a fundamental element of it. That will be a core part of it. So, in your opportunities to engage ministers and the Permanent Secretary, I would be asking them, how are you making sure that you are safeguarding capacity to engage on the challenges in fragile states? Because without that, they're taking their eye off the ball from a development perspective and not focusing on the right things. That would be a very clear indicator that there's a problem in my view.
He also talked about the risk of siloing, and it's made me think, I wonder what conversations are being had with the other departments. So is there, for example, we're losing skills in climate finance and FCDO, but we're building those up in the DESNES department, for example. Have you heard anything about that?
And I think there would be very legitimate questions to ask around, particularly on issues of security. I mean, if we think about all the work that's been done over 20 years on bringing together development, diplomatic defence resources, are we going to be in a position at the end of this where that's any easier? I suspect not.
Emma, the 4 essential shifts. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I didn't see reference, or I don't see how NGOs, international NGOs, fit within that structure. Do you see a place for UK-based NGOs within those 4 essential shifts?
Yes, definitely. One of the essential shifts I'm very troubled by, which is the donor to investor. I think that's a fundamental mistake.
Why?
Because it still focuses on what we put in. All of the global discussion in the last 5 or 6 years, and indeed longer in terms of aid, is how do we turn the taps on? But the bathtub has got great big holes in, enormous holes, and I'm sure you know the figures better than me. At least $35 billion a year leaves sub-Saharan Africa through tax avoidance alone. Once you get to legal profit repatriation, we've created a global financial system that enables, excessive repatriation of profits into usually offshore tax havens and so on. It's 100 billion and illicit finance. So it seems to me that the donor to investor, and of course in some places that investment is a very good tool, but it's being treated as if all we need to do is replace aid with blended finance in order to invest and create jobs and economic growth. But none of that, that's saying don't look at the holes in the bathtub. We don't want to see it. And in fact, you pour more of that money in, and more of it circulates back up into the British Virgin Islands, or the 0.1%, if you like. So that, to me, seems to be using more taxpayers' money to travel through and not leave very much value, say, in African partners.
Where would NGOs fit in?
Sorry, yes, I got stuck on that one.
I can tell it's a pet project and you're right to raise it.
Well, so one of the connections then would be the brilliant work done by NGOs on this knowledge base. The organisations present here, Oxfam, Tax Justice Network, Global Justice, they're the ones doing the hard work to get those figures. Academics are often very rigorous and not very good at telling their story. So, we work with them. And in some ways I would say that role that they play is more important than elements of service delivery right now, which shouldn't be swept away as it is. But for INGOs, the two things I would prioritise is this knowledge support that they provide for where the real economic injustices and enduring poverty are produced. And then the other is through networks down into localised organisations. It's not perfect, we know. I'm one of many who've worked on some of the inequalities of power across international NGO networks. But the truth is many of them do it very well and know badly than anywhere else. And if they have those solid relationships with local organisations, that's a role that they could play too.
Could they fill the gap if the FCDO staff are gone?
No, I don't think so in all areas. I don't know. It depends on what context and what we're talking about, I think.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. What's the panel's assessment of the government's record on communicating the results of UK aid and development with the British public, including the implications of the cuts that were made to development education many years ago?
I could come in on that. So, I mean, there was some very interesting work done on development awareness 10, 15 years ago. I think there were questions about whether it was prioritised in the right way, spent on the right things, but I think there was tremendous value in that work in making sure that there was wider understanding of the work of the UK overseas. I think helping taxpayers to be aware of the value that is added. And I think there were some valuable things that could have been learned from that effort. And yes, maybe it needed to be refocused, but it has just disappeared as an element of what we do. I mean, I did make the point earlier about this issue of results reporting and reporting on impact. I mean, we relied, as advocates for the UK's aid and development efforts, we relied a lot on seeing that information come through from DFID, and we hoped we'd get the same level of information through from the FCDO because it gave us a resource to be able to engage in debates. We need to have debates about the value of UK aid, but also communicate with our supporters, communicate with our networks about what was being achieved. And I think we really need to see a renewed level of investment, not only so that we can communicate that information publicly, but so there's the right level of scrutiny, accountability, and focus on what we're achieving and focusing the resource in the right way. So that information needs to be invested in much more effectively. We have seen some positive signs in engaging with FCDO's communication directorate around their interest and efforts to be engaging publicly on the work that the department is doing and the impact that is having, and we're really looking forward to a more ambitious and focused partnership moving forward. We're seeing the right signs, but there's a lot more to do.
May I also comment on the public thing? It's really difficult to tell. That all of that research actually found it quite difficult to elicit what different people thought. But if we look forward, it seems to me, I'm just going to immediately look back, David Cameron and Andrew Mitchell really worked to sustain what Stefan Durkon called an elite consensus around aid. And for a short time, that sort of held. And then it was undone with Boris Johnson and others. And it seems to me that the majority of the British public right now are a long, long way from being persuaded by the doing good message. And they were not particularly persuaded by the aid and the national good message either. And I think looking forward, we need to really move the ground around this and talk much, much more about shared interests. We have shared interests. Young people in particular might be caught with global public goods like climate change, mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity. Perhaps older people by dealing with pandemics, antimicrobial resistance. The one I really like, I'm going to cycle back to tax justice, would be if we said, you know, Amazon isn't paying tax in South Africa, Zimbabwe or the UK, you know, and instead of seeing, I think if we could break, there's a lot of generosity in the British public and it will go in particular directions, but I think it would be a mistake to try to harness new support through that generosity, charity type model right now when people are feeling desperately under economic pressure. But there might be possibilities for more solidarities to emerge and a stronger sense of we have a shared interest in these things.
Anna, you wanted to come in? Can I
Yeah.
go to Anna?
I wanted to add to this from more of a generic communications perspective. So I think because it's a complex issue and it's global and it's quite intrinsic, I think sometimes with the voter that is kind of looking at their sort of sphere of influence, it gets lost. So you're trying from a communications point of view translate what a complex system means for me as an individual. So for example, if I'm concerned about, let's say, migration, or I'm concerned about whether I can get something in a supermarket, it's almost breaking down this complex narrative to how does it affect me. And I think in the current environment we are operating, and that's really important. So I think there is a skill there in a translation sense for a communications professional. It's quite important.
And maybe just one point to add, there's also an issue of coherence. If the government is going to engage in the kind of rhetoric that we've seen recently around migration and displacement, it's going to be very hard to have a kind of equivalent argument about solidarity and shared values. So I wonder whether that's coming together in any way.
I think to add that, I mean, what's fragility really about? It's a global world order that's quite insecure, and it does affect the UK, right? And this is important because Britain is safer if the world is safer, and that message hasn't really come across.
If I may follow up just on development education specifically, how important do you see it, and what's the current state of it in the UK school system, and what needs to be done to improve it? Because my personal view is that those cuts 10 years ago have undermined public support, maybe not immediately, but in the years since. Where's the new generation of people coming forward that really care about these issues in the way that our generation did?
Yeah, it's a real concern. I mean, I obviously I'm not an expert on the curricular element of this and how pervasive it is across the school system, but you know, looking back at that period, that would have probably been the main resource and probably only dedicated resource that was available to schools to be educating and engaging children on these issues. And I would imagine in the current constrained schooling environment, there's probably virtually no resource currently invested in that area. And yes, you're right, it does contribute to the challenge of the next generation understanding not only morally why this is important, but also how it links to so many of the things that we care about in the UK and the ways in which development overseas affects us here. It's a real problem. And, you know, we as the international NGO sector are having more discussions than ever about how we play our part in helping to bring attention to these issues. There's only so much we can do, and we would love to have more of a partnership with the government, for example, on these challenges. We know resources are constrained, but there is a value in having an electorate that better understands these issues. And I think if we design programs in ways that focus on that value and where it can add value, I think we can do some really good work. So yeah, we'd love you to bring that question to the government's attention.
I'm going to push back on you because you work for Bond, which is a membership umbrella organisation for NGOs that are delivering development work and you know, a really broad range. You linked it to an electorate issue. I would say it's a citizen issue, and we are online now. Couldn't your members each do a little video? Because I know whenever I go into my primary schools, they are obsessed about climate justice, for example, and the teachers are really keen to have things that they can share with the children. So if all of your members came up with little 10-minute videos, I don't know why it's the government's role to be doing that. In partnership, yes, but why can't the sector do this?
It absolutely needs to be part of our job, and there's definitely far more for us to do. And I think the current context where we're seeing increasing questions in the media and publicly about our own development efforts, and we're hearing voices saying we should really scrap virtually everything that we do in this space, is a serious wake-up call for us to be much more active in finding ways, as you say, cleverly, in engaging ways to have that conversation with the public. We do, though, would benefit from having a partnership with the government on this, because at the end of the day, the government spends more than our members do, and the government is engaged in different ways that complement what we do, and we need to do this as a partnership.
I'm glad to hear that you saying that you've had that wake-up call, because you don't always convey that, and even in your opening remarks, Gideon, with due respect, you suggested that we were going to go back to an increased level of spending. We had a very good debate in Westminster Hall recently on ODA, and the general consensus cross-party amongst MPs is that there will not be an increase unless we can deal with the issue we're addressing, which is that there is a rise in public support. So, I mean, you do have a big part to play in that. Of course we do, and I don't diminish, and I don't think anybody around the table would diminish our responsibility and leadership in that regard. But the sector has a big responsibility, and I think we were in the US in September. There was a general acceptance there that even if there was a Democratic president tomorrow, there would be very little change to the US support, the US position, because actually it is underpinned from where the public are. But what we did see there was that NGOs, US NGOs, were starting really to have a different mindset about how they needed to approach issues, because we weren't going back to just the level of government funding that we've experienced before.
I agree.
Emma, I know you're trying to get in. Can I bring Brian in?
Well,
and then
it was just to give you some ammunition, and that was from today, from the International Organization for Migration, and they were saying the single largest number of children coming unaccompanied to the UK at the moment is from Sudan, and guess what? It's the world's worst catastrophe happening there.
Really?
Emma, you wanted to come in?
Just quickly, I do agree with you. I think we can't do a rearguard attempt to defend aid, and this is why it's so alarming to hear about the lack of strategy. But I'm on, as I'm sure everyone is, a lot of groups which are predominantly voices from the Global South, and there's been a lot of horror at the immediate impact of USAID cuts, but almost everyone agrees that in some ways there is a small green shoot, which is the sticking plasters come off. Lots and lots of discussion amongst those Global South networks and individuals about how do they change up. And I think working with them, it could be seen as a bit optimistic, even naive in moments. But working with those southern voices and organisations, and they're saying we need to really think about debt justice. We need to think about how do we support domestic tax, resource mobilisation, all those other good ideas. And I do think that this is, we don't want to lose the extraordinary expertise and work that the development and DFID have achieved. But there is time for a change, and it is really, I think, quite a comprehensive one, with justice at the heart of it.
Who do you think will drive that change? Because that's the part I'm not. Who is going to drive that change? Because I think my view is what's happening in the UK is it's a reactive. It's not. We've decided there's a better way to do this, which helpfully is cost less money. We've decided we just want to spend less money, and looking out internationally. I mean, the US have a very clear agenda which is focused on themselves. So who is actually going to drive? Because I actually share your optimism, but that's the part that I feel is missing.
I believe that the Minister of State and the FCDO has a responsibility to try and create a safer world for the UK. And I agree, I think a safer world for the UK is a better world for most people. And that is why I would really, even in this moment of extreme difficulty economically and politically, which we all know about, it is their role to lead a strategy which is serving the citizens of this country better. And some of that, I think, is through working better with different southern partners, with the NGO community and others. But yeah, I think it's time to really think differently. I'm really hoping that some of these Beth Heron, who's sitting behind me, about to do a PhD, is maybe going to be looking into can we try out different sorts of narratives? Can we persuade the Labour reform type voter in Leicestershire of a particular version of what shared interest might look like? We're going to try out some ideas maybe. And see if there's different ways of doing it.
We'd be grateful if you kept us up to date on those. Freddie, is it very small and specific?
I just wanted to really endorse that, and I think the question for the FCDO is, can they shift their mentality to be a sort of enabler of those coalitions? They're used to going into rooms and being in charge because they're the pen holder or they've got the most money. And I think the mindset shift that needs to take place there is how do they be a coalition builder and create those spaces? Because it has to come from a lot of different partners at once, and I think everyone on both sides of this desk have a role in that.
Really, I think the worry that I have at the moment is I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think the restructure is happening before the vision is laid out. So I think we're going to be in a very difficult place, and I think it's going to be luck if we've got those right skills, which is not where I want to be. James.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll come to you first. And I think time is ticking, so maybe swift answers if possible. What opportunities, we talked about kind of the shift in approach, what opportunities do you think are presented by the 4 essential shifts?
So I think one opportunity is obviously the systemic approach. That's in principle right, because if you have functioning systems, you are not reliant on aid. But I think there are a few risks there. So firstly, when we speak about the donor and investor shift, how do we define investment? Is this supporting economic systems having better perform? Is this implementing systems in contexts that are a bit more fragile? And I think especially in fragile contexts, that approach can't be applied because they don't have the environment where this works and where you would get a return. So the systems have to be built. So I think the sort of long-term thinking is correct, but the short-term thinking around you need staff to start that process. You have to communicate that process, and that's, I think, where the risk is, because if there are a lot of local staff costs, if there are central staff costs, expertise means people. So without people, you don't have that. And you need them long-term. So I think that's one point I'd like to make. I think the other opportunity, we've talked about this, is multilateral. So we've done at ODI a lot of research around how much capital you could free from multilateral reform. And I think this is where the UK can definitely push, because ultimately, if you want systemic change and you want to do it at scale, that's how it can happen. I do think there's a lot of expertise within the country, but obviously, they have to be pooled more together and things like that, so that needs coordination as well. The Aid for Trade program is also powerful, but again, mostly in middle-income countries, so it doesn't apply to others. So I think what's really important is thinking around what the country wants to achieve and what to focus on, because if the staff number stays as is, there needs to be more depth and less engagement.
More broadly, opportunities and risks of the 4 essential shifts. Yep.
So I think the shift on international interventions to local we see as an enormous opportunity. There have been constraints and challenges in moving resources from donor countries and from the centre into countries. So I'll give you an example. In the humanitarian space, there's a global commitment to ensure that 25% of humanitarian assistance is delivered by local organisations. Globally, we're still at low single digits, and this is 10 years after that commitment was made. So we really need to see this particular shift is one that's ever more important now because there is less UK aid overall. We do need to see a disproportionate move of that resource into country, and that's why the reorganisation of FCDO isn't a bad thing per se. It just needs to be guided by the right strategy. If you've got less resource, you do need to think much more carefully about what resource you have in the centre versus in country. So there are opportunities there. I think if I was to highlight We agree, I think, on the donor to investor shift. I mean, applying this too bluntly in contexts where countries really aren't ready to have a significant shift from donor resource to private sector resource introduces risks. But also in contexts where aid, for good or for bad, is playing a significant role in service delivery, moving to a model where you take that resource out and only focus on capacity building, doing it in the wrong ways too quickly is also a risk, and that needs to be dealt with very, very carefully, which is why this strategy, both at a corporate level but also at sector levels, is really, really important. You get that wrong, you can cause tremendous harm, and I think we need to generally have a do no harm approach to the way these shifts are taken forward so that we avoid those risks.
Are you seeing that thought process playing out now?
So, I mean, we have been in discussions where officials have talked about technical work ongoing, and some of our members have, so for example, we've got members who are working very closely with the gender team and with health system strengthening teams, etc. And I'm hoping that their submissions to your inquiry will help bring some of that out. But our fear is that not enough of that thinking is being done. And I think one of the really big concerns we have is, if you go back to 10, 15 years ago with DFID, they had very, very detailed multi-dimensional strategies that guided their in-country work. We've asked repeatedly for questions about what will guide the way a reduced level of resource is going to be used in country. Are there strategies being developed? Is growth and inclusive growth diagnostic work being done, which is what DFID used to do? And no answer back. And we're really concerned that the analytical work that used to underpin a much more strategic focus of where resource went is not being currently carried out in the department. And if you have fewer staff centrally to support that work, I think that increased the risk further that work isn't going to get done.
I'll just come to Freddie and Emma maybe with the follow-up questions, which is, will the shifts save FCDO money in the long term? Do you believe the 4 essential shifts will actually lead to financial savings, which obviously has been described as one of the core motivations earlier? And do you think that the department in-house has the skills to be able to deliver those shifts today? Maybe start with you, Freddie, and then Emma.
I mean, maybe just, and yeah, this picks up on what I wanted to say, which is around this shift to localisation. I think there are opportunities, and I think there are plenty of people in the Foreign Office that believe strongly that that is the direction of travel. But I think the key questions are the one you're asking. To really achieve that in the humanitarian sector, you've got to have a really strong engagement with the multilateral system. Frankly, the UN system is a barrier to really strong local leadership of humanitarian action. And to tackle that, you need engagement in New York, you need engagement in Geneva, you need engagement on the ground. You need to build the relationships with the partners. You need to understand the kind of political complexity of these environments. You need to be able to identify actors like the emergency response rooms in Sudan and the complexity of the environment that they're operating in, and how to appropriately be a partner to do that. There are undoubtedly opportunities for saving money. That is clear. The systems we have at the moment are not efficient. But if you don't have the capacity to do it well and to hold the various parts of the system to account and to join up those conversations, then you're going to struggle to achieve those goals. And what you're sadly going to end up with is what's been described as a smaller, meaner humanitarian system rather than something more effective.
Would you advocate for a greater reduction in actual ODA spend if in return you manage to hold up the capacity of the FCDO? In the long run, do you think that's the better outcome?
I mean, the focus should obviously be on outcomes, and both spend and staffing are a means to an end. So you want to get the right balance. Yes, if you were to say, I mean, because I guess one version of that is get rid of all the staff and keep the money. You wouldn't want to do that. So there's a balancing point, and I fear that we're not in the right place.
But can I come to you on the same point? So will those shifts achieve that saving for the FCDO and the capacity in-house to actually deliver the shifts?
I think it would be a false economy. I don't think I think the loss of soft power and of efficacy in the world is not worth it. I do think we need to look forward though, and that anecdotally I can't speak for the FCDO civil servants, as well as the sort of palpable despondency. I have been tracking people are trying to keep issues alive. but they're also thinking about rebuilding. So many of these development experts have lived through, 40, 30, 20, 10 years of change. It hasn't been all lovely up lands of poverty reduction for they've been through that moment where the big gender breakthrough in Beijing, there's been a lot of change. And so I think there are many people there who are not sort of stuck in their ways and looking back either. They're surrounded by a world. The US is a good example. What's happening in the Netherlands, New Zealand, and China, India, Brazil. And I think within the department, that development expertise is what we need to be sustaining to build forward, as well as to try and retain the expertise. But it's expertise that is dynamic and can be an important, really critical source for thinking about what a strategy looking forward might be, because it isn't the past. That is for sure.
David?
Yeah, Gideon, can we start with you on how the government should be balancing the bilateral funding allocated through centrally managed programmes versus funds being spent by in-country teams?
So this is a very complex question, and it would depend on sector by sector and theme by theme what is the best balance of resource. I think we certainly understand the imperative to make sure that we have the right resource at country level, especially in a much more constrained resource environment overall. And our understanding is, I think the government has been explicit about this, there will be fewer countries in which there's a major aid partnership. So there'll be fewer. They are narrowing the number of countries where there will be a major aid program remaining. So we know that we've heard that some of the smaller, less geopolitically significant countries, let me put it that way, are very likely to fall off the government's aid partnership list. And we could see as many as 4 or 5 countries in which the UK has had decades-long partnership end their major aid relationship with the UK. And so that's what's at stake. There are very serious trade-offs here, and those which comes back to the strategy point. Dealing with enormous trade-offs, major risks, you need to have a strategy to guide that. Just one additional point I'd make is there are probably some areas where it is useful to have central resource, and I think those need to be thought through very carefully. I mean, we've seen obviously significant value in the central resource that DFID and FCDO have had around civil society. So we've been working with the civil society team to hear about the work that they are doing to support country offices to work around issues around human rights defenders, shrinking civil society space in country. These are enormous challenges across the world, and they are growing. And central capacity and resource is playing a really important role in helping respond to those challenges and adding to the capacity that country offices have to deal with those challenges. We know the officials have been working on these plans for some time. It has moved forward very slowly, and all the cuts and the changes in strategy have slowed that process. So we haven't seen dedicated civil society programming disperse resource since 2022 or 2023. And we're really eager to see the new generation of programming come through. We're told by the officials that they are piloting new approaches, but I think we won't see the new programs come online until resource allocation and strategy decisions have been made. So the quicker those decisions are taken, I think what officials, what ministers have told you here in the committee is that resource allocation decisions will be taken by the end of the year or early next year, and we'd hope that by the beginning of the next financial year they would be in a position to have certainty about the pots of money they have available for things like dedicated civil society programming, and then be able to move it forward.
Do you think there will be any centrally managed funds?
I think it sounds like there will be some. I think, for example, they do want to retain some level of resourcing on working with civil society at the centre. It's anyone's guess how much that will be. I think from what ministers have said, across bilateral, multilateral and centrally managed programmes, the centrally managed programmes will face the biggest cuts. That's what seems to be the direction of travel. So it will be severely diminished, but we can only guess at what level it will remain.
Do you think there'll be any strategic alignment, or
well, you know, we hope there will be, but I think there's a limited confidence at the moment that will happen, based on what we're hearing publicly about where strategy review processes are up to, and how well they're being aligned across the department in various different ways.
I think it's a dark day that we're reliant on hope for something that has so much impact internationally and so much impact on our international standing. Thank you all very much for the evidence that you've given to us. We will be keeping a very, very close eye on this, and this is the start of the sessions that we'll be having, trying to advise what the government's vision could and should be, and the consequences of the decisions that they make in the next couple of weeks, if not months. Thank you all very much. Thank you, committee members. Order. This session is now